Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for November the 8th. Today we are reading together Job chapter 34. Job chapter 34 is continuing on in Elihu's speech to Job and his three friends. He is definitely going to turn up the heat and the rhetoric within this particular speech as he very much goes after Job and makes a very strong accusations against Job. So let's read that together here in Job chapter 34. The beginning of verse number 1, when we're told that Elihu continued saying, "Hear my words, you wise ones, and listen to me, you knowledgeable ones. Doesn't the ear test words as the palate tastes food? Let us judge for ourselves what is right. Let us decide together what is good." For Job has declared, "I am righteous, yet God has deprived me of justice. Would I lie about my case? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job? He drinks derision like water. He keeps company with evildoers and walks with wicked men. For he has said a man gains nothing whenever he becomes God's friend. Listen to me, you men of understanding. It is impossible for God to do wrong, and for the Almighty to act unjustly. For he repays a person according to his deeds, and he gives him what his conduct deserves. Indeed, it is true that God does not act wickedly, and the Almighty does not pervert justice. Who gave him authority over the earth? Who put him in charge of the entire world? If he put his mind to it, and withdrew the spirit and breath he gave, every living thing would perish together, and mankind would return to the dust. If you have understanding, hear this, verse number 16. Listen to what I have to say. Could one who hates justice govern the world? Will you condemn the mighty righteous one? Who says to a king, worthless man, and to nobles, wicked men? God is not partial to princes, and does not favor the rich over the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. They die suddenly, and in the middle of the night people shudder and pass away. Even the mighty are removed without effort, for his eyes watch over a man's ways, and he observes all his steps. There is no darkness, no deep darkness, where evildoers can hide. God does not need to examine a person further. That one should approach him in court. He shatters the mighty without an investigation and sets others in their place. Therefore, he recognizes their deeds and overthrows them by night, and they are crushed. In full view of the public, he strikes them for their wickedness, because they turned aside from following him and did not understand any of his ways, but caused the poor to cry out to him, and he heard the outcry of the needy. But when God is silent, who can declare him guilty? When he hides his face, who can see him? Yet he watches over both individuals and nations, so that godless men should not rule or ensnare the people. Verse 31, suppose someone says to God, I have endured my punishment. I will no longer act wickedly. Teach me what I cannot see. If I have done wrong, I won't do it again. Should God repay you on your terms when you have rejected his? You must choose, not I. So declare what you know. Reasonable men will say to me, along with the wise who hear me, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without insight. If only Job were tested to the limit, because his answers are like those of wicked men, for he adds rebellion to his sin. He scornfully claps in our presence while multiplying his words against God. Job chapter 34. Thinking about the way Elihu starts this particular chapter, he sounds a lot like Job, kind of sarcastically talking about wise ones and knowledgeable ones. But he's very confident, I would say, Elihu is, in the way that he is understanding and interpreting what is going on here within this particular story. Let us judge for ourselves what is right. Let us decide what is good. And he goes through again and mentions Job's claims of talking about being righteous and God depriving him of justice, the incurability of his wounds, and though he is without transgression, he is still dealing with things like this. And yet here he goes in on Job in verses 7, 8, 9, talking about he drinks derision like water, keeps company with evildoers, walks with wicked men. That's just not true. That's just not true. And I don't really know what to say about what Elihu says besides that. That's just not accurate concerning what we have been told about Job from this story. Again, I'll just remind you, back in Job chapter 1, in verse number 1, we're introduced to Job in this text. There was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. And then God himself asked the Satan in verse number 8, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity. Does that sound like someone who keeps company with evildoers and walks with wicked men? Drinks derision like water? Not at all to me. That's my judgment here. That again, I think Elihu, like Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, he is off base. Now he does say some things that are true. Again, generally speaking, verse number 11, speaking about God, that okay, number 1, verse number 10, absolute truth. It is impossible for God to do wrong and for the Almighty to act unjustly. That's absolutely true. But then verse number 11, for he repays a person according to his deeds and gives him what his conduct deserves. I mean, ultimately, yes, it's going to be true, but that's not always what happens in this life. And that's the thing that Elihu is going to continue to talk about, is he's going to hound on the part that God repays the idea of God repays good for evil, or so excuse me, he repays good whenever you act righteously, and he repays wickedness with punishment. And again, that's just not true. We know that's not true here within this particular text. I mean, I guess it might be true if God is acting, but we have to understand what's going on in the background here. What they don't understand is that God himself has not afflicted Job in this way. It's not that God has done it, but he allowed it to happen. So yes, it's still in his control, but he's not the one that caused this to happen. They're unaware, and they're flat out ignorant of what is going on within this story, and they're making a number of assumptions. But again, he does say some things that are true. Talks verse 19 about God not being partial. Yes, that's absolutely true as well. Verse number 23, he says that God does not need to examine a person further. Remember, Job is asking for a hearing before God, and Elihu says that God doesn't need to do that. Why? Because God is sovereign and God sees all things already. There's no place. He says early in the chapter, verse number, let me see if I find it real fast, or verse 22, there's no darkness, no deep darkness where evildoers can hide. God sees everything. Verse 25, he recognizes their deeds. He watches over, verse 29, he watches over both individuals and nations. So the godless men should not rule instead of people. Again, that's not even true. Yes, he does watch over individuals and nations, but we have plenty of record in history where God does allow for godless men to rule and ensnare the people. That does happen. So again, their worldview here just is not in line with reality. It's not in line with the reality. And the worst part, like I guess the worst thing that you can do, or that you can add to just a faulty understanding of something that is happening, the worst thing you can add to that is a feeling of I'm right and nobody else is, that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. There's a big assumption that Elihu makes in verse number 34. He says the reasonable men will say to me, along with the wise men who hear me, and that Job speaks without knowledge and his words without insight. Here, Elihu is taking the intellectual high ground. He believes that his understanding is correct. And yet Job's not answering him at all here in this moment. So he feels as if that this is a concession almost, maybe, that he's saying everything right. The worst part about this text, the worst part to me, the one that really makes me want to smack my head is think, Elihu, what are you saying, man? You're so off base. Is verse number 36. If only Job were tested to the limit. If only Job were tested to the limit. I mean, that leaves me nearly speechless. The arrogance, just the I don't even know the word for it. But just the fact that Elihu thinks that he has the right to say this, to act as if Job has not been tested to the limit. I certainly wouldn't want to trade places with Job. And I know anybody reading along with us today would want to do the same thing either, right? Loss of all of his children, loss of so many of his material possessions, loss of his physical health, and again the mental and spiritual drain that would cause for him to feel, cause for him to experience. And yet here's Elihu saying, if only Job were tested to the limit. I think about all this, and I'm just left again today. The lesson I'm taking home is we all need to really do our best to live as absolutely as humbly as we can, because this what Elihu's saying here. I can't imagine Job sitting here and hearing what is being said, and especially there at the end, if only Job were tested to him. I could not imagine the way that Job felt. So can I encourage us all, as we're dealing with individuals, whether they're in a moment of great weakness, whether they're in a moment of great trial, whether they've legitimately been caught up in some sort of trespass and some sort of sin and wrongdoing, can I encourage us all just to really think about the words that we're going to say? Really think about the statements that we're going to make, especially think about the accusations that we might be tempted to throw at somebody. We really need to be careful about that. We need to make sure that we are living according to the words that are written in Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Foul language is the issue at hand. That's the negative that's being spoken against. But I want to think about what the positive is. The positive is that we should only, concerning our mouths and our words, only do what is good for the building up of someone in need, so that it gives grace to those who hear. I don't think Eliphaz or Elihu or Eliphaz or Bildad or Zophar, they were not living out this verse in the way they were dealing with Job. And I understand too that Job said some things that were out of line he shouldn't have said. But coming from where he is, this wrestling that he's trying to do in his mind concerning the reality of a situation, again, I get it. And you're not going to see me casting stones at someone who is really, truly wrestling with the things that he's wrestling with, especially given the circumstances that he's in. He doesn't have scripture like we have to be able to use to make judgments. He's just going off of the things that he's seen, the anecdotal evidence that he has. So grace would certainly be necessary here, and maybe we'll find ourselves in situations where people need grace from us too. They don't need us just slinging accusations. They don't need us just tearing them up one side and down the other. Sometimes they just need some sort of grace, and especially we would do well to do that, considering we might one day find ourselves in the same position. So may we extend the grace that we would hope to receive in such a time as that. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this reading on this Tuesday. I do hope that you have a great rest of your Tuesday. We'll be back at it again tomorrow as we're reading on Wednesday. It'll be November the 9th. We'll be in Job chapter 35. Hope you can tune in for that. And please, again, continue to remember all those in our church family who are sick right now. I'll be praying for them, and hopefully they'll be with us again soon. Again, thanks for tuning in. Take care, and God bless.